Welcome to Bad Guy Compendium, the ultimate podcast for fans of comic books, movies, and the unforgettable villains that make them unforgettable. I'm your host, Finley Strong. Jason Voorhees, the iconic killer from the Friday the 13th franchise, is one of the most recognizable and enduring figures in the horror genre. First introduced in 1980, Jason's persona has evolved over time, growing from a boy who drowned in Crystal Lake into a masked, seemingly invincible killer. Over the course of numerous sequels, Jason has come to embody the quintessential slasher villain, a relentless, unstoppable force driven by revenge and hatred. Wielding his signature weapon, the machete, and donning his trademark hockey mask, Jason became a symbol of the slasher genre, terrorizing victims in the forests around Crystal Lake and beyond. His character, though initially based on simple revenge, took on more supernatural elements as the franchise evolved, becoming less a man and more a force of nature. His lack of dialogue, his deformed face, and his silent yet brutal killings have solidified his place in horror history. Jason's influence goes beyond the Friday the 13th films. He has become a cultural icon, inspiring everything from merchandise to crossovers with other franchises. Over the years, Jason Voorhees has transcended his role as a movie monster to become a symbol of fear and horror in popular culture. History and evolution of Jason Voorhees. The origins of Jason Voorhees' Friday the 13th, 1980. Jason Voorhees' story begins in the original Friday the 13th, 1980, but interestingly, he is not the main antagonist in this film. The original film, directed by Sean S. Cunningham, revolves around a group of camp counselors being stalked and killed by an unknown assailant at Camp Crystal Lake. It is revealed at the end of the movie that the killer is actually Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mother, who is seeking revenge for her son's tragic death. Jason, we learn, drowned in the lake years earlier due to the negligence of the camp counselors who were not paying attention to him while he swam. The film concludes with one of the most iconic scenes in horror history, where a young, deformed Jason emerges from Crystal Lake to attack the final survivor, Alice, as she drifts in a canoe. This scene, while initially presented as a dream sequence, hints at the possibility that Jason might still be alive, setting the stage for the subsequent films in the series. Though Jason plays a minimal role in the original Friday the 13th, his presence looms over the entire story, and it's his death that serves as the catalyst for his mother's killing spree. This backstory of revenge, familial bonds, and tragedy would continue to shape Jason's motivations throughout the franchise. Jason's first appearance as a killer, Friday the 13th, Part 21981. In Friday the 13th, Part 21981, Jason Voorhees officially takes up the mantle as the killer. Set 5 years after the events of the original film, this sequel sees a new group of counselors arriving at a training camp near the infamous Crystal Lake. Jason, now an adult, has survived his supposed drowning and has been living in the woods, watching over the lake and continuing his mother's work by killing anyone who comes near. In Part 2, Jason's appearance is different from the one that would later become iconic. He does not yet wear his hockey mask, instead donning a burlap sack with one eye hole cut out to cover his face. Despite his primitive appearance, Jason proves to be a brutal and efficient killer, dispatching the counselors with a variety of weapons, including a pitchfork and a machete. The final confrontation in Part 2 plays off Jason's relationship with his mother. The protagonist, Ginny, uses her knowledge of Jason's psychological trauma to trick him into believing that she is his mother, temporarily gaining the upper hand. However, Jason survives, leading to the continuation of the series. Friday the 13th, Part 2 is notable for being the first film in which Jason Voorhees is the main antagonist, establishing him as a slasher villain in his own right. His motivations are driven by revenge for his mother's death and a desire to protect the sanctity of Crystal Lake. Jason gets his iconic look Friday the 13th, Part 3, 1982. Friday the 13th, Part 3, 1982 is a pivotal entry in the series, as it is the film where Jason acquires his now iconic hockey mask. Up until this point, Jason had worn the burlap sack to hide his disfigured face. However, early in the film, he kills a local store owner who had been using a hockey mask, which Jason then takes for himself. The hockey mask instantly became one of the most recognizable symbols in horror, transforming Jason's character into an icon. His look was now complete, and with his menacing, silent demeanor, he became a larger-than-life figure in the slasher genre. Part 3 also marked the first time the series was filmed in 3D, adding a new layer of spectacle to the film's kills, which were designed to take advantage of the 3D format. Jason's brutality escalates in this film as he slashes his way through another group of teenagers who have come to Crystal Lake for a weekend getaway. The movie culminates in a showdown between Jason and the final girl, Chris, who ultimately defeats him by hanging him and delivering a blow to his head with an axe, leaving a distinctive wound on his mask that would become a recurring feature in later films. Jason becomes Supernatural Friday the 13th, the final chapter 1984, and Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives 1986. Though Friday the 13th, the final chapter 1984 was intended to be the final film in the series, its box office success ensured that Jason's story would continue. In the final chapter, Jason is supposedly killed for good by a young boy named Tommy Jarvis who hacks him to death with a machete in a particularly brutal climax. This film was notable for its focus on Tommy, a young horror enthusiast who becomes traumatized by his encounter with Jason, setting the stage for future installments. However, the series continued with Friday the 13th, A New Beginning 1985, which featured a copycat killer imitating Jason rather than the real Jason himself. This film was not well received, and fans demanded the return of the original Jason Voorhees. The series responded with Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives 1986, which marked the return of Jason and a shift in the franchise's tone. In Jason Lives, Jason is resurrected through supernatural means when Tommy Jarvis, now an adult, accidentally drives a metal rod into Jason's corpse during a thunderstorm, which is struck by lightning, bringing Jason back to life. From this point on, Jason is no longer a mere mortal, but a supernatural zombie-like entity with superhuman strength and near immortality. This marked a turning point in the series, as Jason became more than just a human killer. He was now an unstoppable force of death, immune to conventional means of defeat. Jason Lives embraced a more self-aware tone, with moments of dark humor and meta-commentary on the slasher genre, which was beginning to face saturation in the mid-1980s. Despite this, Jason's portrayal as a relentless and emotionless killer remains central to the film's horror. Jason Takes Manhattan Friday the 13th, Part 8, 1989. By the late 1980s, the Friday the 13th series had begun to wear thin, with each new installment struggling to find new ways to keep Jason's story fresh. Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan 1989, attempted to shake up the formula by taking Jason out of Crystal Lake and into a new setting, New York City. In Jason Takes Manhattan, Jason is once again revived through supernatural means and follows a group of teenagers on a cruise ship bound for Manhattan. The film's title suggested that Jason would spend most of his time terrorizing New Yorkers, but due to budget constraints, most of the film takes place on the cruise ship, with only the final act set in Manhattan. While the film was critically panned for its lack of originality and failure to capitalize on its premise, it did feature some memorable scenes, such as Jason stalking through the streets of Times Square and a rooftop boxing match in which Jason decapitates an opponent with a single punch. Despite his shortcomings, Jason Takes Manhattan further cemented Jason's status as an iconic villain, willing to follow his victims wherever they go. Jason Goes to Hell, Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday 1993. In the early 1990s, the Friday the 13th franchise underwent another major shift with Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday 1993. This film, directed by Adam Marcus, was intended to close out the series, and it took Jason's story in a radically different direction. In the opening scene, Jason is seemingly killed by a special FBI task force, but it is soon revealed that his evil essence can possess other bodies. For much of the film, Jason's spirit jumps from host to host, using their bodies to continue his killing spree. This departure from the traditional formula was divisive among fans, as it shifted the focus away from Jason's physical presence and more toward a supernatural storyline involving ancient curses and demonic possession. While Jason Goes to Hell was not the end of Jason's story as originally intended, it did introduce a tantalizing teaser for what was to come. In the film's final scene, after Jason is pulled into hell, Freddy Krueger's iconic glove emerges from the ground and drags Jason's hockey mask underground, hinting at a future crossover between two of horror's biggest icons. Jason in Space, Jason X 2001. In 2001, the franchise took an unexpected turn with Jason X, which transported Jason into outer space in the distant future. Set in the year 2455, the film follows a group of space explorers who discover Jason's cryogenically frozen body and unwittingly bring him back to life. Jason X leaned heavily into camp and sci-fi elements, embracing the absurdity of its premise. In this film, Jason is not only revived but also transformed into an even deadlier version of himself after being upgraded with futuristic nanotechnology, becoming Uber Jason. Though Jason X is often criticized for its over-the-top plot, it has since gained a cult following for its sheer audacity and willingness to break from tradition. Freddy vs. Jason 2003. One of the most anticipated horror crossovers of all time, Freddy vs. Jason finally arrived in 2003. Directed by Ronnie Yu, this film brought together two of the biggest icons in horror, Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street series. In Freddy vs. Jason, Freddy Krueger, who is unable to haunt people's dreams due to being forgotten, resurrects Jason to instill fear in the town of Springwood. Freddy hopes that Jason's killing spree will cause the townspeople to remember him, allowing Freddy to regain his power. However, Jason's unstoppable nature leads to conflict between the two villains, culminating in a violent showdown. Freddy vs. Jason was a commercial success and remains a fan favorite for delivering on the long-promised clash between the two horror titans. The film's ending leaves the outcome ambiguous, with Jason and Freddy both seemingly surviving their battle, suggesting that neither can ever truly be defeated. The 2009 Friday the 13th reboot. In 2009, the Friday the 13th franchise was rebooted with a new film directed by Marcus Nispel. This reboot combined elements of the first four films in the series, reintroducing Jason's origin story, and updating his character for a modern audience. In this film, Jason is portrayed as a more calculating and survivalist killer, using tunnels and traps to stalk his victims. The film also reintroduces key elements from earlier films, such as Jason's relationship with his mother and his acquisition of the hockey mask. While the 2009 reboot received mixed reviews, it was successful at the box office, and it helped reintroduce Jason Voorhees to a new generation of horror fans. However, despite its success, plans for a sequel were eventually scrapped due to legal disputes over the rights to the Friday the 13th franchise. Jason in pop culture. Jason Voorhees has had an enormous impact on popular culture, transcending the boundaries of the Friday the 13th franchise to become a symbol of horror in general. His image, the hockey mask, the machete, and the hulking, silent presence has been parodied, referenced, and celebrated in a wide variety of media. Merchandising and video games. Jason's iconic appearance has made him a popular figure for merchandise, including action figures, posters, Halloween costumes, and more. The hockey mask itself has become a symbol of fear, instantly recognizable even to those who may not have seen the films. In 2017, Friday the 13th, the game was released, allowing players to either control Jason as he hunts down camp counselors or play as the counselors attempting to survive his attacks. The game was praised for its faithful recreation of the Friday the 13th atmosphere, and it allowed fans to experience the thrill of either being Jason or trying to escape him. Parodies and references in other media. Jason's influence extends into various films, TV shows, and even music videos. He has been parodied in comedies like Scary Movie and has been referenced in animated shows like The Simpsons and Family Guy. His silent, hulking persona, along with his signature hockey mask, makes him a popular character to spoof in media that pokes fun at horror tropes. Conclusion. Jason Voorhees has earned his place as one of the most iconic villains in the history of horror cinema. From his humble beginnings as a vengeful child in Friday the 13th to his transformation into an unstoppable killing machine, Jason has become a symbol of fear and terror. Over the course of 11 main films, a crossover with Freddy Krueger, and a reboot, Jason has consistently evolved while maintaining the core elements that make him a compelling villain. His impact on the horror genre and popular culture is undeniable, and his legacy as one of the greatest slasher villains of all time will endure for generations to come. Jason Voorhees is not just a character, he is a force of nature, representing the relentless, inescapable fear that has kept audiences on the edge of their seats for over 4 decades. Subscribe to Bad Guy Compendium anywhere you get your podcast or at roguemedianetwork.com and get ready to delve into the minds of the most iconic villains in pop culture history. I've been your host, Finley Strong, and remember, evil never sleeps, but bad guys are forever.